Good afternoon. Welcome to another installment of our Festival Seminar Grove. We love these production seminars, and we're grateful to our sponsors, Cedar City Bryan Head and Tourism Bureau, that make these possible. And I am especially excited about celebrating a part of the theater that we don't often think about, but is very, very important. I am joined by Scott Palfreyman, our Electrics Director. So good to have you here. Scott, tell us who we are visiting with today.
Well, today we have Joe Payne, who has been designing for us for a season or two, I think, or longer. How are you today, Joe?
Good. Yes, I've been at the festival since off and on since 1993. First as a board operator, and then for a couple of years, and then I came back as a designer in 1999. I started designing and then started composing in the mid-2000s when Christine Frezza retired from the festival.
Fabulous. So what led you, what got you your start in theater?
So in theater, this is I grew up in sort of a theater family. My dad is sort of a Utah local celebrity. As an actor and a singer-songwriter. His name is Marvin Payne. And he, when I was little, we always had music in my family. I come from a musical family, and he had a recording studio that I used to play in. But he had a one-man show called The Playmaker that he used to do all over the place. And when me and my brother were in middle school and junior high, he asked us to be his tech crew, and I ran sound, and my brother Sam, who's also a musician and a storyteller, he ran lights, and so that's how we got into theater. In high school, I wanted to be an actor, but in college, I realized that was not going to be the case. And so I put my family's musical abilities, my musical skills into practice, I guess, and started doing sound and music for theater.
So were you in college when you first started working here as a technician?
As a technician, I was a sophomore in undergrad, a sophomore in college, and I came down to Utah Shakes to do to be a board op. And my first show was Our Town was the show that I was board op for, and I really enjoyed it. I had so much fun. I came back for a couple of years, and then I went and started doing more theater and more projects, and ended up in Virginia as the sound designer for the Virginia Stage Company, and then came back to Utah and started designing for the Utah Shakespeare Festival in the summers and at Pioneer Theater Company in the rest of the year.
Fabulous. So today we get to talk about Othello, correct?
Othello, yes. You want me to just start talking about it?
Start talking.
Awesome. I love Othello. I love the story, and I love the themes. I love the tone of Othello. And I've done Othello 4 times, once at Pioneer Theater and 3 times at the festival. And every time it's a little different, and every time we've got a different take on it, and of course a different cast and a different director. This director, Kate Buckley, wanted the show to be intimate, wanted it to be about the people and the closeness of the people. And that's why I think it worked really, really well in the Ames Studio Theater, because it really just showed off the character of the piece. It also is, she wanted it to be sort of timeless. And a lot of directors say that and say, we don't want to time, we want it to be modern but not feel modern, and old but not feel historical. And so finding a world where it fits, where it feels sort of modern and historical at the same time is a challenge, and it was a fun project. I have I thought that do you want me to start showing stuff, Scott?
Whatever you would like.
Whatever I'd like to do. Well, what I did is I put together a few little things that some pictures of Othello, so that we can, because sound needs context, right? Sound needs context. Otherwise, we just listen to an album of sound and music. And so this is a little sort of album cover I made. I wrote the music for Othello, and I archive all of my scores as albums, and I made this album cover based on our actors and set design. And things that I wanted to point out are the sort of Middle Eastern quality, the darkness, the sort of starkness of it, were all important to the director and important to this production. As you can see, this kind of the production itself was, and this was a 2018 production, just so everybody's aware, the 2018 production. Brian Vaughn as Iago, very well done, evil Iago. Simple set, simple design, very much just about the words and the characters. Just a little hint of style in the scenery with this pattern here that is very much sort of Moroccan or Northern Africa or Middle Eastern. Modern, but not completely modern. You know, we had some military, but the royals were all in something that sort of could be modern, could be sort of period. It was a beautiful, beautiful piece, and really well acted, and well performed, and it was a fun piece. So what I wanted to talk about is sort of how I created the space and how I created music and brought this space to life. This is a ground plan of the AIDS Theater, and it is a ground plan. So we see the set here that you were looking at before. It's the thrust space with actor or audience on three sides. This is a speaker plot. So these are all the locations that I had speakers. I had some speakers on the floor backstage for some sound effects. I had some speakers underneath the seating in the corners of the theater space for sound effects. And then I had speakers in the air. I had a left and a right speaker for every audience bank, so that every audience could get this sort of sense of and it was in the air, and a sense of music towards them. And then I had speakers here. They're not colored like the others, but they are in black and white. The speakers surrounding the audience. So every audience member had speakers in front of them and speakers behind them, creating this environment. And I love playing with the environment as a whole. I love the interaction between an audience and the performer, and having sound be an element that can tie them together and create an atmosphere and mood. So this is basically where I went with the whole thing. This is the technology behind it, and I'll show you the artistry in a moment or two. As we talk about the music and as we talk about how I put it in a space, I wanted to mention the software that we used. And partially the reason why I was asked to do this is because I think that it's an interesting way to present the sound in a space. And that is, this software is QLab. And it is the playback software for theater. It's sort of the theater standard of playback software. And you load in music, you load in sounds, and then you can manipulate those sounds. You can make them louder and softer and move with the action. And then you've got this little mixer, and each one of these sliders is a location in that set. So all of these are labeled the way that that ground plan was, with a center speaker, and then the south wall, house left, south wall, house right, west wall, house left, west wall, house right, and so forth, all the way around the theater. So this is how many speakers we were working with. And so if you can imagine mixing the space, not just like your stereo office, but mixing the space like you would a location-based environment, that any sound can come from any one of these points, which is really exciting and fun. And if you see here, this is sort of different cues, so that you have a single cue with lots of elements happening. And this is the whole point, is that I created music that then I brought back into the space and divided up into the speakers, so that all of the music and sounds had this big sense of space. And I'll show you as we move forward what that sort of means. These are some other things as a sound designer for theater, just the communication that takes place. I create cue plots for stage managers and the technicians, and sheet music for actors. This is a variation of a traditional version of Willow that I simplified and changed around a little bit so that Desdemona could sing this song. Interestingly, I then took this version and applied it to the soundtrack, is the point. So that you have a sense of the show as we listen to the music. I wanted to just give you a few more interesting, exciting pictures of the production and its emotion and visual interest. So now, what do we do with all that information, right? That's what the set designer and costume designer and actors are kind of doing, and I create a world around them, and I create at the same time that they are creating. So I'm throwing ideas out to the director at the same time the set designer is throwing out ideas to the director. And Kate Buckley and I landed on this sort of certain sort of sound. She liked the idea of hand drums, that sort of Middle Eastern hand drum. And I had done a production of Othello earlier that had a duduk, which is a sort of an oboe from the Middle East, and so we sort of based the score on that. And so let me play you a little bit of what the scores kind of sounded like. What I'm sharing with you now is my recording session. Everything that I do when I create music is synthetic. Two reasons why I create synthetic music. One is because I'm what we call a one-finger pianist. I can play this pretty well on a piano. I don't play this really well on a piano, and it's hard to find real musicians that do this kind of sounds. And if it stays synthetic, I can manipulate it like crazy in production, so that I can take little bits of this and little bits of that and little bits of this and little bits of that. And I really enjoy doing that. So, but based on those pictures, this is the sort of, this is the curtain call for the piece. So this is the modern end. So this is as modern as it got. That's sort of the sound of the show. That's sort of, you can see here kind of all the implementation of the instrumentation here. I did play all those notes, but I played them very slowly and one at a time. And you can see that when I build music, one of the interesting things about how I build music is that each one of these little blocks is a phrase. And so I'm repeating phrases and repeating phrases, and some of these are shorter phrases that repeat, and some of them are much longer phrases. And so melodies, this right here is the Duduk melody that that plays over the top of everything, is more organic, whereas the structure of the music itself is a little bit more repetitive. This is the entire session for the show. So I build the entire show as a single session so that I have, and I use the same orchestration for the entire thing. As you can see here, this orchestration has that Duduk we talked about, some strings. Because I'm not a great musician, I do legato strings and tremolo strings as separate tracks. Pitch strings, which is plucking strings, and I've got a cello in here and some cymbals and hand drums and some bigger drums. These are my favorite drums. The taiko drums is big giant drums every once in a while. Interestingly, I've discovered that in that space, these taiko drums sounded too muddy and reverberant, so I added just a kick drum version of it so that I could make that punch, that really sharp punch, when I wanted to without the reverb. But I have some brass in the piano and some tremolo, some really creepy. Really, if you can hear that, it might be really quiet. Some sort of creepy strings. And what I always do at the beginning of any project is I create a sort of theme. And this theme, I just kind of experiment and explore all of the sounds that might happen in the show, so that then I can split it up and cut it up. And so let's see what we have here in this theme. that is sort of what became the theme song of the whole thing. You can see there's some. This is kind of a fun track because this is the basis of all of the underscoring for the whole show. And it has an ambient string, pulsing drum and pulsing and tone. They build and build and build so that I can take one of these elements and use however I want. And that's what I wanted to talk about next. Is I typically do a session like this where I just layer and layer and layer and layer and layer and layer so that then I can say, ooh, this moment could just use a drum, or this moment could just use some tonal strings. Scott.
Yes, sir.
Would you like me to answer any of these Q&As as we go, or should I wait until the end, or
whatever you would like? How would you like to do it?
I am a bit quiet on the mic, I'm being told. I wonder if I can turn it up. I think these questions are interesting so far. We have a question here about how many people are responsible for the right sounds and the right cues during a play. So the work down of the staff is that as the sound designer, I create all the sounds and all the music, or find all the sounds and find all the music. I implement all of that. And that is based on discussions with the director and discussions with, and reading the script. Sometimes sound and music is dictated in a script, and sometimes it's not at all. It's dictated by the action, or dictated by the moment that's being created, or dictated by the director who wants to create a moment out of something. And then I take all of those sounds and program them into the show. And then we have a stage manager who says when cues are supposed to happen, who tells a board operator when to hit go on all of those cues. So that we have a board operator who's actually running the computer to make sure that the cues happen, and happen in the locations that have been pre-programmed. So sorry, I'm getting distracted by this lovely chat. So what I want to do now is kind of go through some of these cues.
Before you go on,
yes.
So there's still a lot of steps in between when you create the sound design and when we actually have sound on the stage. Do we want to kind of cover a little bit of that?
Sure.
The discussions we have about, placement of speakers, of how much options you have of placing the speakers, as well as how we get the system tuned to what you're trying to deliver for that season.
Sure, absolutely. We in any theater there is what we call a rep plot of things that sort of stay useful for everybody in every show, and then within that there are movable components. And so sometimes, and it depends on what shows are in the space and which designers are working in the space, whether a sound designer shares a space with another sound designer, or whether the sound designer is the only designer for that space, determines whether Scott and the Electrics crew will allow me to decide every single speaker placement or just some of the speaker placements. Last year, the season that was postponed because of COVID, there was going to be a musical and a play both in the Ames Theater. And so the sound system, we decided to put speakers in locations that were optimal for miking with wireless mics, which is different than than a play that doesn't have microphones, that is just ambiently represented. The speaker locations might be different. And so the very first part of the process before I create any kind of cues is I work with lighting and scenery and everyone to determine where the speakers can live so they're not in the way of other things. Also where they sound the very best. And that's a process that takes a little while based on what the set designer is doing and how many revisions happen. And then once that we land on that, nearer the rehearsal process, then the Electrics crew starts putting those speakers into place. And at the same time, I create content for rehearsal so that the actors can play with in rehearsal anything that is needed if there's a dog barking off stage and the actors really need to know the timing of that dog barking for their acting moment to determine when they need to move on to the next emotional beat, I give them that dog bark in rehearsal so that they can respond to it, as well as any music they interact with. Sometimes directors like a lot of stuff in rehearsals, and sometimes directors like very little in rehearsals because they don't want it to influence the actors too early in the process. Scott brought a question to my attention earlier a question about what I think about when I create music. That I thought might be interesting. I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping around topics here, Scott. Is that okay?
Oh, you're just fine. I'm used to it.
You're used to that. I know, I just jump around all the time. I was saying earlier that I'm kind of nervous because I kind of just sit in the theater in the dark room at my table and just create. And I don't really talk about this work a lot in front of people, except my impressionable students. I just tell them what to do all the time. So creating sound and music for a play. Sometimes I use pre-produced music for a play, and sometimes I write music. So, and depending on a designer's skills, sometimes sound designers find more music than they create. Sometimes they create more music than they find. We call that found music when it's actually somebody else's music. Usually what I like to do is use found music when the music recognition matters. So that if we want to recognize Beethoven or we want to recognize Mozart, then I want Mozart to be recognized. If we don't want it to be recognized, then I write it because nobody's heard it before. And that goes for any sort of genre of music. Now, I'm a better composer at some music and a worse composer at other music. So that also factors in. Sometimes I write I'm not classically trained, and so my music tends to be a little bit ambient, a little bit repetitive, a little bit sort of has a sort of a techno bass to it, a techno sort of rhythm to it, and I know that that's not perfect for every show. But what I always think of first, the reason why the music exists in a show is because of the emotion that it creates. But that's actually the last thing that I can actually attend to. What I have to attend to first is the time and location. So the setting of the piece is, because music is such geography-based and time-based that the music is different depending on where and when you are. And so that is what I always go to first. And then within that history of time or place or geography, Then I decide, oh, now I can use dark music or happy music or fast music or slow music. Um, uh, there's a note here saying that they saw the 2018 production of Othello, but don't remember a lot of music. And I think that that means that I'm doing my job correctly, because I actually believe that you should walk away going, that was the most awesome play in the whole world. Not that was a decent play, but man, that music was fantastic. I think that it should all be integrated so tightly that you can't really tell uh, that is just storytelling. We are just storytelling. And so ultimately, and you'll hear from these little snippets that I'm going to play in a minute, is that I don't know why I'm stuck on this page. I could actually talk to you in person, I suppose. All of these cues, many of them are little tiny little snippets of 6 bars of this and 3 notes of that, just to get us in and out of these moments. So what I wanted to do, so this is the top of the show cue to listen to. Things that are interesting to note about this is that if you can see here, stylistically, we wanted to definitely just immediately bring up the idea that we are another land, sort of a Northern Africa or Middle Eastern style of piece. That I love to mix sound effects and music so that music and sound effects are always intertwined. And then you can see here that right now you're hearing waves underneath me a little tiny bit, I think. But what you can see here is that I have lots of music tracks running. I have the brass and the cymbals and the hand drum and the taiko and the kick. And the reason for that is multi-tiered, is that what we call that is mixing stems in the space. So I sound design with stems. And the reason for that is twofold. One is I want the space to be the space. I want to capitalize on the fact that we're in a space. If I mixed this music down in the recording studio, it would sound great and I'd play it, but what if the brass can come from here and the drums come from here and the strings are below us? It adds to the richness of the space and adds to the fullness of the space when it all is expanded that way. The second thing is the space and the space will sound differently than the recording studio. So being able to actually mix this music directly in the space means that it's exactly the way I want the audience to hear it and not similar to what I want the audience to hear it, which is exciting. Also, keeping it in stems, I can do things like this. Iago is always underscored. You hear this sort of tone. You hear this tremolo string. I can mix those in the space, but I can also manipulate them as we move so that on this particular line, I want to increase the tremolo. On this particular line, I want it to go just to tonality. And it turns out that all of the action and all of the fighting and all of these monologues, these soliloquies that were in the, we're talking to the audience, there were like 3 or 4 or 5 cues every time that happened, so that we could build and build and build and change and manipulate, so that it was different different based on exactly what the actor was saying, which was kind of fun and exciting, right?
I'm going to pop in here and remind our crowd online that they can continue to put questions in here. I'm actually coming in selfishly because my head is full of so many questions right now. There's a reason why we do this. The reason why we offer these production seminars is I want the audience, I love Nana Kat's question, because I want the audience to start to listen and start to be aware that when that, I'm just bringing this up as an example, that when we're doing Macbeth and we hear that owl, it flies around you, and I know you've done this before, that you're literally having it go from speaker to speaker to speaker, that those are intentional choices that nobody notices, but that you have done those. And so while we're waiting for other questions to come, I want to highlight one of my favorite moments that you designed. I want you to talk about how you built this design, and then how and if that spontaneously comes, or just kind of how you go, I'm going to do this. So I was watching The Price, Arthur Miller's The Price, which you also designed.
Yep.
And I believe the choice was made, there's a certain pieces of music, but there's really no music in that whole show. And you made the choice to use the cityscape, barking dogs, trains, distant car honks, all that type of stuff. But there is a key, amazing spot in that show where the characters are debating with one another, and it's getting more intense and more intense. And I felt like I was hearing it through the skylight, but this intensity increasing. And I had the chance to see it in a early dress rehearsal. And I went running up to you and I went, "Did you do this? I feel like the sounds of the city came in and permeated me during that moment, and then it left. But I don't think I'm supposed to notice that, but I swear that's what happened, or am I just creating that?" And I just want you to tell me your response, because on one side, you don't want the audience to notice that thing. But on other point, I went, wow, that's really great. And I think as informed audience members, the more we learn about these things, we begin to appreciate the artistry that goes into that. So I'm going to disappear, and I'll just know that I'm bobbleheading off here on the side as you're talking about all of these screens. And I want to know, are they spontaneously created? And I've got another question to load into this. Sometimes actors don't do the same thing each night. And so that arc that you build into that cue where you push go, that soundboard operator is just pushing go, because these textures were built at the beginning of the season, and Armin's going to do something different. So how do you create an orchestral piece like you've shown here that's going to do the same thing when Brian chooses to speak differently and otherwise? And I'll take my picture in silence offline and try to contain myself.
Thank you, Michael. Absolutely. So he's absolutely right. When I say that I use sound effects and music together, I also use them just interchangeably. I think that we as sound designers want to enhance the emotional state in the room, and we want to drive action forward. And so The Price, the director and I talked Kathleen talked very long about the lack of sound in Arthur Miller's script, and but the space and the intention needed to always rise and fall and rise and fall. And so the idea was, so that we came to an idea to build tension through cityscape, and build and release silence through cityscape. There was lots of times in the play that Michael Barr's right, is that as they argued, the city got louder and louder and more aggressive, until finally something was broken and it was gone. You're like, oh. And that's an exciting thing to be able to do and a fun thing to be able to do. Also, I did, for the same show, I would do they would be talking, banter, and there'd be silence. And then you'd hear a car pass. And then they'd kind of recover and then get back into it. And so you can use sound to help guide the emotions, guide the direction, and guide the attention of the audience and of those moments. Flexibility in that is the key. So every single thing I create, lots of times musically, sonically with backdrops, is I have a combination of drones and beds and things that are amorphic and things that are specific. And I can take music that is amorphic and then at any time add something specific into it based on if the actor's being different that night. So that at a very, very specific point, something becomes specific and then starts to roll from there, and then can become ambient by creating sets of cues that the stage manager will call and the operator will hit go on, so that it feels the same every night, even though it has been extended and contracted. And I find great joy in that, because it goes back to the audience not really knowing but feeling. I want the audience to feel the aggression in the room. I don't want them to hear the music in the room. And that's kind of fun and exciting about sound. I mean, there's every once in a while when you want some big theme that you want the audience to really pay attention to. And that is fun. That's very fun. But often it's the case that I want them to just kind of, that was really scary, and I don't know why, and that's really exciting. That's very exciting.
Well, how do you incorporate vocals, both when it's live music as well as recorded?
So in vocals for live music and recorded. So the that's a tough question, because it also delineates sort of different styles of design as well. Is that I treat a play very much differently than a musical. In a musical, I kind of feel like we are communicating to the audience, and that the whole audience wants to be communicated to in a certain way. And so my sound system and the way that microphones are used in a musical is just to get a nice, even, very realistic or very clean communicative sound. And sometimes if it's rock and roll, it's loud. If it's Gilbert and Sullivan, it wants to feel more natural. And so that's just sort of a volume balance. But in a play, I like to sort of feel the space and feel the audience. And I do use lots of recording of voices and special effects to make it feel like there's more people than there are, and there's more space than there is. In Hamlet last year, we did, the ghost was live and had a microphone to add reverb to the space, and had voiceover recordings of himself in different speaker locations, so that then you felt like he was bouncing around, as well as, so I use microphones in all those different ways depending on the production. What I feel very, very strongly about is dynamics. So loud and soft. So I want a play to be as dynamic as possible. That means there's as much as subtlety as possible, and there's as much angry, loud, or big as possible. And I love playing with those dynamics. And all of those dynamics are way too much for a CD. A CD, you kind of want everything in a general volume shape. But in theater, in a space, you can just be really, really subtle with volume, and just really just loud with volume. There's a question about sound absorption. So according, even sound absorption in the theater. So actors, space, seats, anything that adds volume to a space can also take away sound or bounce sound around. So the sound of the space itself is affected greatly by the things in the space. And sound designers are contractually obligated to stay with the show until they understand what the bodies in the space are going to do to the space. Because we, in an empty theater, set all these gorgeous levels, these dynamic sounds that sound like subtle and perfect, and then you get 100 bodies in there and you can't hear it at all because they're soaking up the sound. So then we adjust and adjust and adjust till we get that subtlety back that we remembered when the audience wasn't there, or the energy back. Often they soak up just enough sound that you can still hear everything fine, but it doesn't have that energy. And so we boost it back up to hear that energy. So changing the sound based on the audience is actually quite important. And audience response, laughter, clapping, all things that interrupt the sound or make the sound not heard. And so we have to manipulate and change those moments based on what the audience is doing. And so that's part of that's really why theaters have previews, so that it gives us a chance to fix that while we're still technically not open.
So Marie would like to know, what do you do when you are stuck creatively?
When I'm stuck, I go back to the director and just bounce ideas. A good director, to begin the project, a good director will give me inspiration. I have some directors who give me music that they want in the show. I have some directors who give me music that inspires them about the show. I do research and find music that inspires about the show. And I think that give and take about where those inspirations come from are important and help the block. So when I start and the director has given me some, we did King Lear a few years ago in the Adams. It was the last year of the Adams Theater. And the director, Sharon Ott, wanted music inspired by Sigur Rós, which is a Icelandic, Nordic, a rock band that does sort of tonal stuff and heavy electric stuff. And the guitarist is famous for playing his electric guitar with a bow. And that set me on the path to write some music. And I would get blocked every once in a while and go, oh, I just can't, it's not feeling it, I can't come back. So I'd go back to that source material and say, now, am I really capturing this source material, or am I the good things about the source, or the things that relate about the source material? So I often, when I get stuck, I just go back to what the director and I initially talked about, or I go back to the director and get more information. Yeah. Do we have more questions?
Is that kind of indicative of how you do your research on your different productions?
It is. I always, so in what we call the design concept meetings, I have a siren happening right outside my office. During the design meetings, when the set designer is coming up with ideas, the costume designer is coming up with ideas, I always try to either have a latching point where whether that's something that I've written as an idea, or that I brought to the table as a source material idea, or that the director has brought as a source material idea. But I actually don't write a single note for a show until the set design is completed, because I am influenced by the set design more than anything else. What the world looks like influences me like crazy. I mean, I kept talking in these Othello pictures about the sort of Moroccan feel of those panels, and that was a lot of influence on the music I made, and the simplicity of the design was also a huge influence on the music that I made. So regretfully, and I warn a director about that all the time, because some directors want to start with music and then go visual, and some directors want to start visual or start with costumes and build everything else around it. I can't really do anything until I see the set, and that's just the way I work.
Okay. So Leslie says that technology can be a wonderful thing and yet it can be a beast. What things have gone wrong and how did you fix it?
Things go wrong all the time.
Yeah, like all the time.
All the time. Um, I, so, Michael Barr mentioned that the sound crew during the show is just hitting go. And in a perfect world, that is just hitting go. But the reason why they're there, the reason for their expertise is because what happens when they hit go and nothing happens. They need the expertise to be able to solve those problems. And I rely on my technicians like crazy in keeping the technology flowing and keeping it working. And it does get quite complex because we have all kinds of with the lighting console is talking to the sound console because they run each other so that things can sync up really well. We have a ton of speakers with a ton of failure points. We also, my system, my laptop, it has to connect with the system to sync files and to do all the programming and the notes, and it gets quite complex. You have to be a good problem solver, I think, is key, and that partly being a sound designer and in the sound industry is that you have to be a good technician and an artist, and that's kind of tough. In some of the other areas that you can be more of an artist and not understand the technology at all. And this is one of those things where you kind of have to have that dual mind because you have to understand the technology behind it. And I think that in the early 80s and 90s, when sound design was coming into its own as an art form rather than just a technological thing, in the 80s, a director would just say, here's the music I want, and a technician would just kind of put it into place. And then we started having people say, well, I kind of creatively, what if we did this? And creatively, what if we did that? And that step went along with these huge strides in technology that made it easier to be creative rather than just technical. But at the same time, it became more complex and more complex. So it became harder and harder to keep up with that technology. I don't know if I answered your question, because I think we take it moment by moment is really the key.
So kind of along those same lines, have you ever had a project or even a day in tech that you wish you could just erase? And what did you learn from it?
I do. I do. We have, there have been times in when I can't think of a specific moment, but there have been many times, there have been times when doing musicals, because musicals tend to use the technology in ways that are quite complex, and that if you're prepared for it, the technical dress rehearsal process goes really smooth. And if you're not prepared for it, it just doesn't. And there's been many times when I just said, okay, we obviously aren't ready for you today. You're obviously frustrated, and we are obviously not making progress. Can we revamp the day and start over? I am big on transparency and big on humbleness and letting people know where I am. And I feel that I've gotten pretty good at not waiting till the end of the day to say, oh, well, that all sucked. Instead, in the middle of the day, say, hey, this kind of is not going well. How do we revamp this idea? Philosophically, that's how it all happens, but a very specific moment. I do remember a lot of very specific moments when I tend, in my transparency, I tend to talk before I think, and I always say something that's dumb. And the next day, I wish that had gone away. I do that.
I think we've all experienced that. So Jennifer would like to know what program that you are using for your editing.
Oh, all of my music creation is in Reaper, which is a multi-track audio editor. It's cross-platform and it's pretty cheap. And it's because it's really cheap. It's when they first built it, it was open source. Since then, they charge a little bit of money, but I use it because I teach undergrads and I teach them music editing and music mixing and music recording, and it's been a platform that students can have at home with them and not spend a lot of money. I used to work a lot in Logic Pro, but since I've been teaching more, I didn't like going back and forth. So I have capitalized on Reaper, and I really, really like what it can do and like what it does. Most of my effects are wave effects, and most of my instruments are native instruments.
Okay. Reaper is a great program for students since it's so cost effective and intuitive for them to use.
Yes.
Whereas some other programs, it's a little hard to teach.
Yep.
And then she would also like to know, when you put the individual tracks into QLab, how do you realign those tracks to create the sound you had in your editor?
Well, this is here. Let me share this. So I'll go back to my score. So if I want to mix this down, so I've got all of these tracks, right? And instead of mixing it down just as a stereo file, which is the typical way to do it, is through the render settings of the session, there's actually a setting that will render out each track so that they render out, and what it'll say is, I'll have a title for the song, and then it will attach strings at the end, or strings tremolo, or strings staccato at the end, so that I know that they're all different. And so they're each individual sound, and I just do it as one batch, so it doesn't take any longer. And then as long as I have the area selected, all of the starting points are the same. So when it's rendering out strings staccato, it will put silence before the strings actually happen, and then it'll do the strings, is the whole point. So they do actually start at the same time. But if you'll see here, so that when we're in QLab, so here's that curtain call again, so that this is what it'll say. And if we look at my location is, I've got Othello show, an audio folder. These are all from the edits. So in tech, there would be a new curtain call, and then all of the curtain call tracks are labeled individually as tracks. And this is what they look like individually. So here's the hand drums all the way through. The duduk is not. And the way that it mixes down each one of those tracks is it mixes it down based on the level that I have it in the recording session. So even if I just load them all in and play them all at the same volume, it should be quite similar as default to my original music session.
Awesome. So then Michael would like to know, as an artist, how do you balance directing the emotions of the audience and letting them get there on their own?
That's a really challenging, that's experience. Just being in the room long enough to know what kind of works for the moment and what kind of doesn't work for the moment. And it also has to do with director style. Some directors want to, I'm very much, I'm sort of a passive designer. I want the director's vision and their themes to really drive everything. So that if they want lots of underscore, I want lots of underscore. If they want very little underscore, I want very little underscore. And I capitalize on that. I always try to make the director's vision the best that their vision can be. But ultimately, there's been many, many times where we try underscore because I think that it's going to help. And then we sit with it for a couple of days in rehearsal and just go, you know what? I think that it overdoes it. I think it's overdoing this moment. I think it would be better for the actors to feel it on their own. It's always easier to pull back in the process than to create something on the fly. So I tend to over prepare and over design so that we can just strip away. And I'm happy to do that. But a lot of that happens at the very last minute. It's in previews and in dress rehearsals when we think that we are supporting and then we find out that we shouldn't, or that we haven't been and we should. And it's just active listening. It's always being an active participant in the listening of what's the audience doing? What are the actors doing? What's the moment feeling like?
Well, and is your choice of instrumentation also driving some of those emotions?
Absolutely. I use instrumentation quite a bit that way. I've sort of had this sort of Shakespearean sort of, since I've been doing it for a while, I have these sort of specific, what would you call it? Sort of my go-to ideas. I use lots of dark tones and lots of heavy drums. I use heavy drums for bad guys. I use dark drones for sinister scenes. I use sparkly stuff for ghosts. So I have sort of all of these go-to ideas, but I do definitely sort of thematically think of bigger, richer sounds and happier, thinner sounds for the different moments. So it does guide me. It does guide me a lot.
Cool. I'm sorry. And Scott Palfreyman is going to give me the hardest time when we go off air here. I couldn't contain myself. I couldn't contain myself. I want everyone who's listening right now to know these are two really, really brilliant artists. I've had the pleasure of working with both of them. And it's a part of the theater that I'm so glad you talked about the tension and the balance between both artistry and technology knowledge. You know, the knowledge, you've got to know that technology. And as you get deeper in the technology, you know, how does that get in the way of the art and how does that amplify the art? And again, my whole goal is I want audiences to know that. Again, you don't want to, hey, here's a music cue, but wow, when you're able to listen and hear what's happening, it's just another side of the theater that really amplifies the work that we're doing, and is really, really great. Before I do a close off and a thank you, is there anything else, Scott, that you want to share?
Well, I would hope that the viewers would go see the SM virtual seminar, because right at the end, Tanya calls some of Joe's cues from Henry V, just so they can experience that side of what it's like for the operator.
And I know that I didn't play a whole lot of stuff for you today because I was just chatting. But here's a little plug. my website, paynesound.com, paynesound.com, has all of this music. So you can like look through what all of those moments might have been.
Yeah. Well, they're fabulous. And I do want to celebrate, as you did, our soundboard operators. They are artists. And if we get our way, we're going to see if we can celebrate some of them through these seminars too, because there's an artistry, how that artist interacts with the other artist is really, really important as well. So thank you. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate that you have been here for this. Joseph, Joe, thank you so much for all of your many years of designing and for sharing this as well. And I want to celebrate, I know Jennifer and other teachers are watching this too. I mean, they're learning, and I appreciate you making these tools available to us so that we can learn. Next week, next Friday at 1 o'clock, we will have Scott Palfreyman, Director of Electrics, back again to talk to a designer that, Joe, you worked with. Karen's going to be joining us. Is that right? No, Rizika. Donna.
Donna, I love Donna.
Yeah, Donna Rizika, who has designed lights here at the festival, been a lighting designer for years in multiple spaces. And I know you have worked with her too. So don't miss that. That's going to be next week at 1 o'clock. And
Donna and I were saying the other day, or a month or two ago, that we think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Donna and I are the only designers who worked in every single space.
Wow. Adams, and I know auditorium too. You've worked in the auditorium
too.
Yeah, absolutely. All of those spaces. Well, you'll really enjoy that conversation. So please join us next week for that. Also next Thursday at 10 o'clock, we're going to be speaking to Frank Rizzo, theater critic, international and national theater critic, who also will be talking to us about the play Hamilton. And so we look forward to that conversation. These conversations are available online. You can find them on our website at bard.org. If you just go down to Virtual Festival, you can find past productions and links and look at that. You can also go to our YouTube channel, and we would recommend that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and that you like and share these conversations with your friends as well. Special thanks to our sponsors, the Cedar City and Brian Head Tourism Bureau, and we are so grateful for all of you listening and being a part with us today. Thank you very, very much, and we will see you at the theater.